It is the Awesemo NFL DFS Tournament Strategy Show. Title a little in the works. I think it's going to be something we're going to tinker with a little bit. But one thing that's not going to be changing is every Saturday, at least for now, every Saturday around this time, Neil Orfeld and I, we're going to be talking about millionaire maker strategies, large field tournament strategies. The reason being, Neil won $1 million last year. So that kind of seems like somebody who, only a few people have done that, won a million maker. And so I think he's a good person to just pick the mind up for a couple of reasons. Number one, other than his success, he's also familiar with Awesemo. He used the tools a lot last year and in the past, and now he's actually producing content for us. So I think it's a good way for people to kind of get into like, okay, what are some of the ways you approach these slates? Maybe some of the ways you use Fantasy Cruncher to build your lineups. But that aside, Neil, how are you feeling about week one?
I'm excited, man. We're a little over 24 hours away. I can't wait. I mean, football, it's I don't know, it might be my best sport, but it's definitely my favorite for DFS purposes. I feel like it's kind of wild every week. Of course, there are the weeks like, I think it was last year, week one, when Nyheim Hines ruined the slate like 3 minutes in. So not always the most fun, but it's fun building up to it. I enjoy playing.
What's always funny about week one specifically, but also NFL, DFS in general? I've never built lineups where I felt like this is going to win GPPs. Every time I swim out, it's like, this is the nuts. This is it. And It usually goes to shit about 90 seconds into the slate. It's like, oh, look, an 85-yard touchdown by somebody I don't have exposure to. But let's see if we could hold on maybe a little bit longer than the 85-second mark today. Also, today's show, guys, is sponsored by Jock Market. We'll be talking about more about Jock Market as we go along here. But I also just want to ask, before we get into some of the specifics of week one slate, just talking about just general overview of NFL DFS. And one thing I was kind of curious to ask you, one on just a friend level, and then also kind of from a DFS mind, what are your expectations coming into this year after you won a million maker last year?
Ooh, that's a good question. My expectations are that I'll be profitable. It's kind of tough because there's only 17 weeks. So like you really need one of those weeks to swing right to be profitable. But why would you play if you're not expecting to be profitable? I'm expecting a lot of high scores this year. Again, I feel like scores were trending up last year and I would expect that to continue. So I guess it's really hard to have too many expectations at this point in the year, but yeah, I'm definitely looking to bounce back after a terrible August. My worst month ever, just playing MLB did not go well. So ready to bounce back with some football. I think it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people should understand the swings, particularly if you're a GPP player. I know for me, the best year that I've had playing football was 2 years ago, and I literally had 2 profitable weeks the entire season. But it was 1 week I was just really profitable on FanDuel, where I won like one tournament for $35,000, and then there was a bunch of other smaller tournaments that I either won or had high finishes in, and that made my entire season. And I think that's kind of the same for football, baseball especially, where it's just tournaments that pay out really top heavy. There's a lot of variance involved. And just because you aren't profitable on any one individual slate doesn't mean you didn't build good lineups, and it doesn't mean your process is bad or anything like that. It really is a grind, and just trying to make sure you're overall making sure that you're building lineups that correlate correctly and that actually are sensible, and then also trying to take advantage of some of the ownership situations. But also in terms of creating upside, I wanted to ask you, because I know you build lineups in Fantasy Cruncher, what kind of stack settings do you use?
So for stacks, I typically just do quarterback with one pass catcher and one run back. And that's in part because I play like the largest field tournaments. So I feel like if you're playing, smaller field, 1,000 or less maybe in the field, then you might want to do 2 pass catchers with your quarterback typically, because you'll need, you don't need quite as much upside, but the correlation, you still kind of want to maximize your correlation there. And then I typically set it so that I can't have a running back wide receiver, I can't have 2 running back wide receiver or tight ends from a team unless they are with the quarterback. Just because I feel like it kind of limits your upside to have too many players from the same team. I do make exceptions for that with weeks where there's actually the week I won the Millie, Jamal Williams was 4,000 and he was a starting running back, and Devontae Adams was also in a smash spot. So I allowed for having them both in my lineup. So I do that sometimes, but typically I avoid that.
It's good to hear. We actually set like basically the exact same rules in Fantasy Cruncher. So that is something that is definitely welcome news to my ears. And now transitioning into talking about the quarterback position for this week, I also think we need to talk about some of these rushing heavy quarterbacks. And this is something I had to change my process a couple of years ago, where I used to only exclusively make stacks for tournaments. But the thing that changed was really the emergence of Lamar Jackson, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's a quarterback who is not particularly great at throwing the football, but I need to get exposure to him in tournaments because of his immense rushing upside. And Lamar Jackson isn't on this slate particularly, but I kind of feel like we have a light version of him in the league now in Jalen Hurts, where if you look at Jalen Hurts' numbers from last year when he started, there were some games where, like his last game of last year, if I remember, I think he rushed for 2 touchdowns, but only had like 79 passing yards. So he was still a valuable DFS quarterback, but you just didn't want to stack him with anybody. And he's somebody who I'm thinking I'm going to be playing a lot of naked this year. And that's something also that as I'm building my lineups and I'm starting to set some stack rules, I'm going to allow myself to get to some shares of him that don't have one of his either wide receivers or tight ends with him. So I'm going to ask you, number one, what do you make of Jalen Hurts for week one? And then number two, are you willing to play him without one of his pass catchers?
Yeah, I love Jalen Hurts this week. He's probably maybe going to be my highest owned quarterback. And I think what I'm going to do is set groups so that if I have Jalen Hurts, I'm going to boost Philadelphia pass catchers and then also Atlanta pass catchers. And that's something I'm struggling with a little bit is the Atlanta side. Do you know what you're going to do as far as, are you going to require a run back? I mean, I feel like because it's Atlanta, I could, because I feel like they have some pass catchers I want to play anyway. But I feel like part of the reason that you like to correlate your quarterback with opposing players is that they're not going to be passing late in the game if the other team isn't also scoring. So I don't know to what extent I actually feel like I need a run back with Jalen Hurts if he's going to be, I mean, he can still be running in the fourth quarter, even if they're up. What do you think you're going to do there?
Well, the thing is, there's quite a few plays I already like from Atlanta anyway. Like Calvin Ridley is one of my favorite overall wide receiver plays on the slate.
Me too.
Kyle Pitts, who I don't know that we know exactly what his role is going to be, but there's clearly immense upside in Kyle Pitts this year entering the year. And, he could be somebody who's just going to be a wide receiver that has tight end eligibility. And at least for DraftKings, he's really cheap to open the year at 4,400. That feels like a misprice. He's only projected for 11% ownership. I thought Kyle Pitts was going to end up being massively popular when I first saw that price tag. Somewhat popular, but it's not really the case. So to me, just because I like some of these options so much on the Atlanta side, Mike Davis, also, I think not my favorite running back play on the slate, but is also viable. But just because of how much I like Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts, I think even if I didn't set a rule, I'm just going to end up with one of those guys in quite a bit of my Jalen Hurts lineup. So I think I'm going to be running back with him quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah. And I think I will too. I mean, like I was saying, I think that I will boost them in Fantasy Cruncher. I just might not entirely require it. But yeah, Kyle Pitts is really interesting. He actually doesn't look that great in the boom bust duel. I guess we can talk about him later if we're going over quarterbacks right now. But I feel like I'm going to play him. He's one of the few plays where I'm like, I look at the boom bust duel and I might just go against it, kind of. I might make the decision to play him despite not looking that great because he's just such an unknown right now. But yeah, I agree. I mean, it is a situation where I like the Atlanta pass catchers enough. I feel like Philadelphia has a pass funnel defense. I'm probably going to be playing plenty of them anyways, but I might not require it for Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, and then as for some of these pay up options, quarterback, and by the way, quarterback, this might seem weird to people. Quarterback is not a position of like a lot of attention for me. I care a lot more about the overall outlook of the games and who I could stack those quarterbacks with. To me, running backs, wide receivers, that's generally a position that's really important to me. Quarterback, I tend to be pretty spread out on, where it's like there's a lot of guys who I'm getting, 3 to 8, 9% of. There's generally not going to be a slate where there's any one quarterback to I'm making like 30% of my lineups around Patrick Mahomes or any one individual quarterback. Do you also tend to make a lot of stacks kind of spread out QB exposure?
Yeah, I do. I think it's just it might be a kind of a risk tolerance thing too. I mean, you play a lot of quarterbacks, you're more spread out, you're taking on less risk. But also, I feel like every week you can kind of you can find reasons to play several different quarterbacks, and I think this week is no exception. I was kind of thinking there are 4 quarterbacks right now that I expect to have at over 10%, and everybody else is. I'm probably going to have another 10, 12 quarterbacks under 10% owned. So. I definitely spread out my quarterback exposure, and but But this week, I feel like I really like some of the options at the top. I mean, I feel like all of Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Kyler Murray look really good in the Awesemo tools. So I imagine I'll be playing a lot of those guys. Those three, along with Hurts, are the four that I'm thinking I'm probably going to have a lot of exposure to those guys.
Yeah, and by the way, those were the four. I was gonna ask you if I could guess who the four was. I'm not exactly sure I was gonna say those. I'm gonna say I was and just be like, hey, I'm on the same page as you. But
Yeah.
I certainly don't have an issue with any of those guys. The other thing too is because I think quarterback is kind of a volatile position in terms of just trying to find the ceiling. There's a lot of times to be like, oh, if there's a quarterback who's 20% owned, it's generally a spot that I don't want to be stacking really heavily. Or if there's a quarterback who's like 1 to 2% owned, that I think there's a lot of upside, it's a spot that I want to be on. But it's pretty flat today to open the season. We have on DraftKings the most projected quarterback in terms of ownership, Josh Allen at 9%. So it's not like he's massively popular. Over on FanDuel, we have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are tied at 12.4% ownership each as the most popular quarterback. So I don't really find any of the ownership here problematic. It's a pretty flat position that all makes sense to me. But is there anybody towards the bottom of the ownership here that maybe isn't picking up steam from the field that you do think is a worthy guy to roster?
All right, so this is kind of, I'm going to start off with a really out there play right away, just to make it fun. See what you think. So Jimmy Garoppolo.
I guess who it's going to be.
Oh, sorry, man. I'll have to give you more time. I'm going to pause next time. Give you some time.
No, it's all good. I'm going to guess if it's based on our projections, I'm going to say it's Tyrod Taylor.
So it is not based. I mean, Tyrod Taylor is one of those guys. He's actually next on my list. I just wanted to get crazy first. I want to see what you think of Jimmy Garoppolo. Because the reason being, so they're playing against the Lions. He's relatively cheap at 5,500. Obviously, the big question mark there is how much is Trey Lance going to play? And so in the top stacks tool, the Niners look really good, but it's also because they have a combination of Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance in there. But I kind of like the idea of just taking a couple shots at Jimmy Garoppolo against the Lions and just seeing if, maybe he can play well enough to stay on the field. Maybe Trey Lance is only, set up to be playing specific plays. And if they, move the ball quickly enough, maybe he just doesn't get in there. I could see Jimmy Garoppolo just putting up really, really good numbers against the Lions defense. I don't know. What do you think? Is that too crazy?
I don't. The build I have right now, I'm not on Jimmy Garoppolo, and there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, I'm concerned about the lingering presence of Trey Lance on the depth chart in general. So I don't think that they're super committed to Jimmy Garoppolo, and the Lions just are so terrible that I kind of get concerned that the 49ers just get up by a bunch and just kind of are grinding out the clock in the second half. This game also has a 46-point total, which is kind of in the middle of the road, maybe towards a little bit of the lower end in terms of totals for the week. But my real concern is just that San Francisco doesn't have to put a lot of points up on the board. They've already showed that they don't love or trust Jimmy Garoppolo. And I know it's a little narrative based, but I just don't really think it's all that likely that we see Jimmy Garoppolo have to throw the ball 30 times or something like that. And something you mentioned at the top of the show is about the overall scoring of football going up. And we saw that in the Thursday night football game, the shootout to open the season. I think there's going to be a lot of games this week where quarterbacks have to throw the ball a lot. And, I think that Jimmy Garoppolo has a somewhat safe floor just because of how easy the matchup is. I just don't know that he has the upside to go out and break a slate because I just don't really see a scenario where, unless something totally crazy happens, that he's going to need to throw the ball that often.
Yeah. No, you may have just talked me off of him because I do agree with you. My expectation is that they just run all over the Lions. And I can't, when I think about, Jimmy Garoppolo lineups, I can't imagine a Lions player that I want to run it back with. Although some of the Lions receivers do kind of pop out in the boom bust tool just because they're all going to be so low owned and nobody really knows who's going to be catching passes for the Lions. So yeah, I think you talked me off of him there. Just kind of throwing it out there as somebody. I might play a couple just because it's interesting and nobody's going to have him, but you're probably right that they're going to need a high scoring game if he's going to be throwing a lot, and they're probably not going to get it.
So my guy in the low end, and this certainly isn't crazy by any means, although I think there's an argument to be made that he maybe should be picking up more ownership. Trevor Lawrence at only 4.6% ownership. It's hard to not love the matchup against the Houston Texans, and something I've been talking about on this game. Whenever I've mentioned it during the week on other shows I've done, we have projections now for team totals and team wins and stuff like that. We have the Houston Texans projected to go 4-13 this year. It's by far the worst record in the league. This team absolutely sucks. And I think this is a really good way for Trevor Lawrence just to get his feet wet in the NFL, where I think that there's a good chance that him at a cheap price point, he also has some rushing upside, that we see them kind of open it up and let him throw the ball quite a bit in this matchup against Houston. I don't fear anything on that defense, especially because they traded one of their starting cornerbacks just, was it 5 days ago now? And then there's receivers that I like to stack him with. And that's always something I am kind of considering when I'm looking at my quarterback ownership is, okay, not only do I like this quarterback in the spot for him, but is there a reasonable pass catcher I want to combine him with? And Laviska Shenault is one of my favorite plays today on FanDuel, DraftKings, also Yahoo. I did a Yahoo show earlier. So I really like that stack of Lawrence to Laviska Shenault. So Lawrence, at least relative to his ownership, is somebody who I'm probably going to be like double the field on.
Yep. I think me too. He is listed in my quarterbacks that I'm going to play. I just love that game. I mean, I feel like we don't really know what's going to happen there. There's nobody there who like people are dying to play on either team. And I feel like people are going to score. Like they're two bad teams. We just don't know what's going to happen. I feel like there's a lot of upside with Lawrence. Yeah, Laviska Shenault really pops in the boom bust tool. He has a really high boom percentage relative to how many people are going to play him. So I do love the Lawrence and Laviska Shenault. Marvin Jones is also a relatively cheap stack option with Lawrence. And like you said, Tyrod Taylor on the other side also just looks great in the Awesemo tools. I've kind of had to convince myself to play him because you just don't really want to play Tyrod Taylor, and it's hard to know who to stack him with. But I feel like he's a guy that you can also run out there without a stack, probably. I think I will most likely stack him, but yeah, I feel like Trevor Lawrence and Tyrod Taylor are just two plays that are going to go way under-owned relative to their chance of putting up some big numbers.
So I kind of have this rule of thumb since I've started doing content over at Awesemo, which is a thing that even if there's somebody that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, if Alex really likes somebody a lot in his projections, I'm just like, listen, he's a lot smarter than me. His projections like Tyrod Taylor a lot. I'm going to get some exposure to Tyrod Taylor. There's not one thing I could point to where I'd be like, oh, I really like Tyrod Taylor, but he's projected for 3% ownership. He's cheap. He has some rushing upside. Is he going to be the quarterback of the future for Houston? No, absolutely not. I'm sure they weren't expecting him to be the starting quarterback. Then all the situation with Deshaun Watson happened, and now they kind of forced to play somebody else. So the matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, still, it's fine on paper. Houston's home, and as bad as the Texans are, it's not like this is a game that is like a 10-point spread or anything like this. Houston they're a 3-point underdog at home against Jacksonville. So it stands to reason they're going to put some points up on the board. So Tyrod Taylor, just because of our projections, I'm going to be getting some exposure to him. He's far from my favorite player or anything like that, but it's somebody who, if it wasn't for Alex's projection, I would have 0% of him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, me too. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb because I feel like we've all made a lot of money by trusting Alex, and trusting him over ourselves sometimes just is a profitable strategy long term, I think.
So yeah, totally. I mean, that's where I'm at also. It's same thing I do for basketball as well, where it's like, oh, I think this guy's only going to play 18 minutes. Alex says he's going to play 24 minutes. Whatever. He's min price. He's making it into my lineups now. So I think it's also good to also just get another frame of reference on some of this stuff. So Tyrod Taylor, somebody's going to stand out to me in that regard. Any other quarterbacks you want to bring up before we move over to the running backs?
I'd say those are the big ones. I kind of like so other quarterbacks, I'll list them off. Russell Wilson, I'm going to play some. Aaron Rodgers, Ryan Tannehill. You kind of like that game just because it's going to be such a high scoring game. I feel like Tannehill could go off, and obviously he's got pretty condensed options for pass catchers. Aaron Rodgers, I already said him. Matt Ryan, I feel like against Philadelphia is kind of interesting. Sam Darnold, I kind of like. I like the idea of stacking Sam Darnold with CMC, just like running those two out there as a stack. I'll be playing some Darnold, and then Ryan Fitzpatrick and Kirk Cousins are the other guys that I'm probably going to have some of in my lineups, but not a ton.
All right. So now moving over to the running backs, and this is where we have a lot of decisions to make because basically all of the stud running backs are playing. We have Christian McCaffrey, we have Dalvin Cook, we have Derrick Henry, we have Alvin Kamara. Of the top end running backs, is there one that you're prioritizing? Is it split exposure for you? Is there one you don't like? How are you handling these guys?
So it's kind of nice that I feel like their salaries are kind of all where they should be. So I feel like my favorite is CMC. So where I can get to CMC, I'm going to play him. My second favorite is Cook against Cincinnati, and he is the second most expensive. I kind of do prefer Kamara over Henry, just slightly, but I feel like I'm going to have a lot of Tennessee, Arizona stacks. So I'll just correlate with Henry playing in those game stacks more often. So I think I'll probably have pretty split. I'm going to have a lot of all four of those guys. I think they all have a pretty good chance of smashing.
Yeah, and I have slightly different priorities, DraftKings versus FanDuel. So FanDuel,
Right.
for instance, like Derrick Henry's always somebody who scores a little bit better for FanDuel purposes, where it's half point PPR. There was also something I did a Yahoo video earlier, and I was talking about on Yahoo, where Derrick Henry is also cheaper than Christian McCaffrey by quite a bit.
Yeah.
We also, when it's a half point PPR, it becomes a little bit more of a priority. But on DraftKings, I have the least amount of exposure to Henry of the four, where he's my most used running back on the top over on FanDuel. So it's going to be a little bit different for me, site to site here. But overall, it's hard to really stake my claim to one of these guys and say this is the guy. I will say this though, for cash games, if I'm paying up for one guy, it would be Christian McCaffrey for me. Yeah. Same for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't play cash, so I'm kind of outside my realm when I'm talking about it. But yeah, I think McCaffrey is just the most likely, and he has such a high floor because he receives so much that I feel like he's the safest. Cook does have a great matchup against Cincinnati, so I like Cook, but yeah, it's CMC for me if I'm playing in cash.
Yeah, and by the way, this is a tournament strategy show, so maybe I don't need to bring up the cash, but I just kind of wanted to bring up that I did have a lean there on Christian McCaffrey, particularly for cash games. But moving down to the next tier of running backs, and somebody who, once again, maybe fits into a different tier, DraftKings versus FanDuel, because of the pricing difference. We've got James Robinson, 6,400 on DK, which is kind of a mid-tier price. FanDuel, just a crazy price at 5,900, which I think we should definitely be exploiting for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's going to play. There's no Etienne there, so we're going to see a lot of carries going to James Robinson. Also, DraftKings kind of seemed to price Robinson as if he was going to be a starter this year. FanDuel just didn't. They priced him as if he was going to be a backup. So now you get him at 5,900 in an elite matchup, and he's oddly not projected for that much ownership. So in the run of lineups I did, James Robinson is my most rostered player on FanDuel for a couple of reasons. Beyond just the price, the projection, he's only projected for 11% ownership, which just seems egregiously low for a guy in this kind of situation. So what do you make of James Robinson on FanDuel and DK?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, people are a little bit scared off by Carlos Hyde, I think, and I don't really understand that. I feel like they trusted Robinson last year. They gave him the ball tons, and now Etienne was, I think, more of a threat, but Carlos Hyde just doesn't scare me off as much. I feel like for that price and in that game environment, I mean, like you said, it's one of the few games of the year that he's probably going to be running the ball a lot because they might have a lead. So yeah, I love Robinson at this projected ownership. My expectation is that the projected ownership will go up, but I've also heard that it doesn't really move that much from Saturday to Sunday because people kind of set their NFL lineups a little bit earlier than other sports. So maybe it won't move as much as I'm expecting. And if it doesn't, then yeah, I'm going to be smashing in Robinson in my lineups because he was just so good last year. I don't understand why people, is it still the, ETN is kind of in the back of people's minds. They just have an obstacle there. I don't understand why people would not play James Robinson in this spot. I think he's going to crush it on both sites.
Yeah, it's it's hard for me to really pinpoint it also because at one point I say, well, there's a lot of other running backs I want to get to. So it's hard to say that any one running back should be like a 30% owned guy or anything like that. But then I run my lineups and it's like, well, James Robinson, if I don't set any parameters, comes up in 100% of the lineup.
I know, yeah.
So yeah, I think he certainly warrants to be higher owned. I would be shocked if he's not my highest owned player, at least over on FanDuel by a decent margin. Good play on DraftKings as well, but FanDuel in particular. So James Robinson is going to be a very high priority for me. Anybody else in this mid-range pricing tier that's making it into a good amount of the early build of your lineups?
Raheem Mostert, I really like. The Boom Bust tool has him at 5% ownership, but a 13.8% chance of booming. And to me, that's a huge difference right there. So I'm probably going to go over that 13.8% with Mostert, maybe get at least 20%. Because you love that matchup. He's not that expensive. The expectation is that they're just going to run the ball the whole game. They love running. I also kind of like Trey Sermon. I'll probably play some of both of them, just because we don't really know how that's going to break down with Mostert and Sermon. But yeah, I'm going to have tons of both of them because they're both just way low owned relative to their odds of booming.
Yeah, and by the way, Mostert also. The other thing to consider here with them also, some of the reasons I didn't like Garoppolo before are some of the same reasons I like Raheem Mostert, which is just that I don't think Detroit has to, I don't think San Francisco has to throw the ball against Detroit to win this game. I think they should be able to get up to a pretty big lead comfortably and then just grind out the clock a lot in the fourth quarter, start the season 1-0, and the Lions start their march to not winning very many games this year. It's a game that I think also it's a less used stack than it used to be, but I still think there's a little bit of correlation to be said for the defense to running back stack. And I think one of the ones that actually makes sense this week is Raheem Mostert and the San Francisco 49ers defense.
I like that. I like that a lot because the Niners are one of my favorite defenses, and Mostert is one of my favorite running backs. So I do think that I'll probably maybe give him a little boost there. I also like Joe Mixon. I feel like the Vikings defense is kind of a big question mark right now. We don't really know how it's going to shake out. I feel like he's good leverage against some chalkier Bengals receivers. So I kind of like Joe Mixon for week 1. I might even play some P. Ryan. I don't know. We'll see. That might be getting a little bit too crazy, but I'll think about it because I do like pass catching running backs. Kind of raises the floor, and it's just kind of fun. He's 4,000. Nobody's playing him. I might play a little bit of P. Ryan and some Mixon. One guy who's not really popping in the Awesemo tools, but I think I'm going to play anyway, is Antonio Gibson, just based on the hype. I don't know if I'm just buying into hype that I shouldn't be buying into, but they talk about him like he's their CMC, and like just on the off chance that they actually use him accordingly, he's 5,900, not in a great matchup, but if they use him like he's CMC, it won't matter. So I think I'll play some Antonio Gibson as well.
So the only concern I have there is I think they've called everybody on that roster that's a running back, Christian McCaffrey, at some point in the offseason.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Somebody else called J.D. McKissick the CMC of the team, and then they also said that about like Jared Patterson when he was on the practice squad or something. So yeah. I mean, to me, it's kind of like, all right, I don't know how much to put into coach. But you know, with that said, I have Antonio Gibson in my player pool right now. Yeah. I have him around 15% on DraftKings, which is about in lockstep with the field. So. To me, I don't have an issue with them as a play. I just don't know that I'm going to be that much different than the field on them. But okay. I'm not going to go crazy to change exposure based on stuff coaches say or players say, because they say all kinds of stuff in the offseason. But
I think that's generally the right approach. You don't want to listen too closely to what the coaches are saying. I think it's more believable with Gibson than McKissick. And I say that as somebody who has a ton of McKissick in best ball. Like he said, I put on 15 pounds and I'm ready to be the featured back. And I was already buying in because I like the floor of a pass catcher. So I have a lot of McKissick, but just got to take some shots here and there. But yeah, you're right. I guess I'm not really expecting to get too different from the field on Gibson. I just think he's a player worth talking about.
By the way, there is a player who I am not sure what to do with, who I actually do think could be like a light version of Christian McCaffrey, and that's Austin Eckler. We know he has the hamstring issue where he didn't really practice one point later during the week, but he was able to get through a limited practice on Friday. He's now expected to play. I'm not exactly sure what his workload is going to look like, but I love his pass catching ability. I do like the Chargers offense overall. Only 6% projected ownership on DraftKings, 9% on FanDuel. If he had no health concerns, I think he would be a chalk play on this slate just because of his pass catching upside, particularly at 6,900 on FanDuel. So yeah. I think that he's somebody, there's a lot of volatility because we don't know exactly what his health is like. Maybe that limits his snaps a little bit, but I'm pretty bullish on Eckler this year. And he's somebody that I like as a contrarian option.
Yeah, I really like him this year. I don't have him listed among my running backs that I was planning on playing on DraftKings or that I wanted to talk about. But you do bring up a good point. And I think that he was stood out more in the boom bust tool on FanDuel than DraftKings, which surprises me a little bit because he catches so many balls. But I guess it's a price thing. But yeah, I do like Eckler. I think maybe I'll add him into my player pool more than I'm expecting to. Because you're right. I love those situations where it's like people are a little bit concerned by the Q tag and it kind of drives down ownership. And he is a guy that he might be just the featured back who they just give the ball to constantly. It is a tough matchup with Washington. So I think that kind of scares me off him a little bit. I tend to target good matchups. But if a player's good enough, yeah, it's a good approach too. But yeah, he's a good enough player that might not matter. I mean, he can just take one home even against a good defense. So Yeah, maybe I'll add Eckler to my player pool.
Yeah, and I'm overweight to him on both sites, but also more so on FanDuel because of that price point. I think there's some, really good looking cheap running backs between Eckler, Mostert, and Robinson. Those are three of my overall favorite plays on FanDuel, with Robinson being my favorite of the bunch. Before we move on to the pass catchers, any other running backs that you want to mention here?
Yeah, so getting kind of wild again. I kind of want to play either or both of Mark Ingram and Philip Lindsay, just because of the game environment, because we don't really know what to expect. Nobody's going to play them just because who knows who's going to get the carries. But I feel like, you should be able to run on the Jacksonville defense. So one of those guys I think has a chance to break out at no ownership and a cheap price tag. I'm probably going to mix in some Ingram and Lindsay just for the fun of it.
So if I had, by the way, I don't have either of them in my builds right now. If I had to play one, I would go with Lindsay just because he's expected to start, and he has the pass catching ability also, which at least for DraftKings purposes, certainly more favorable. FanDuel, I don't really know that I'm going to be getting to either of them, but if I had to play one on DraftKings, which I don't really know what the situation is where somebody says, hey, you have to play a Houston Texans running back in week 1. But if that situation arises, where I always like to say, if our producer Tyler gets kidnapped and somebody says to me, you are forced to play a running back on the Texans or else we are going to kill Tyler, I would say, all right, I'm going with Philip Lindsay in that situation. 4,700. I could see the reasoning for him. Like you said, I don't know exactly what the breakdown is going to be, but I do think that Lindsay is the better running back. And also David Johnson's in the mix too, which also gives me a little bit of hesitation. Yeah, honestly, I'm probably not going to get to any of them, but if I had,
I understand. But nobody else will either, and that's why I like him.
If Tyler's kidnapped and I have to play one, it's going to be Philip Lindsay, though.
Okay. Yeah, if Tyler's kidnapped and I have to play one of them, I'm going to play both.
That would really sentencing Tyler to something no good.
I'll have to look this up, but I feel like Philip Lindsay is less of a pass catcher than his reputation would suggest. I feel like we all think of him as a pass catcher, but I think I learned kind of late last year that he doesn't actually catch as many passes as we expect him to. But I still like him. I expect he'll catch some passes. So yeah, I'll probably play some of those guys. But yeah, no more need to talk about Mark Ingram and Philip Lindsay. I feel like we've wasted enough time on them.
So we'll move over to the wide receivers. But first, I have to mention that today's show is sponsored by Jock Market. Guys, if you are not familiar with Jock Market, this is a different way to play DFS. There's no worry about lineup constructions. There's no kind of correlation or anything. This is just a stock market, but for the athletes. So it's a pretty fun way to play DFS. There's an IPO period. You bid on the players. Then after the slate starts, you're able to buy and sell players. You're able to sell high on guys. If they're off to a quick start and things are going to slow down, you could buy low on guys. They're off to a bad start. Things are going to start to pick up. Different way to play DFS. It's a whole lot of fun. If you're new to the site, head on over to Jock Market, download the app, use the promo code also when you're making your first deposit, and that will get you up to a $50 bonus on that first deposit. So go download Jock Market from the App Store. But now we can move on over to the wide receivers. And I mentioned him a little bit before and just going to bring him up again. But I like Laviska Shenault a lot for this week. I like him on Yahoo. I like him on FanDuel. I like him on DraftKings. I like Lawrence. I like the stack there. I mean, I think actually on FanDuel, I'm probably going to get really crazy with some Jaguar stacks. We're probably going to have, Lawrence, Robinson, Shenault together, and then find somebody to run it back with. But yeah, I think that Laviska Shenault is a very strong GPP play for this week. I think that there's a chance that he catches a whole bunch of passes. Somebody brought up earlier if his price tag on DK was any bit of a concern. No, I don't think 5,000 is a ridiculous price tag at all, especially because of the potential for targets he's going to get this year. Even if you look at down the stretch of last year, he was targeted in the last 4 games of the season 11 times, 6 times, 7 times, 9 times. Also, if you look at our season-long player props tool, which is a cool free tool they have over at Awesemo.com, one of the best bets that we have on the board for a season-long player prop bet is we have Laviska Shenault project for 82.5 receptions, and his sportsbook number is 60.5. So that's something I bet the over on. So I know you were kind of in agreement with me before, but do you still agree with me that Laviska Shenault is a good GPP play?
No, I think I've changed my mind. Listen to you. No, yeah. So I have the Boom Bust tool open for FanDuel right now. And on FanDuel, he's projected for 6.7% ownership, 10.5% boom percentage. And I believe it's even better on DraftKings. I'm not going to open it up, but I was looking at it this morning, and it's like I think it was at like 2 or 3% ownership and like 10% boom probability. So yeah, I love Chenault, and yeah, 5,000 is not too much for a player with that kind of boom upside. He's only 5,600 on FanDuel. That's not right, is it? Oh, yeah,
He is
5,600 on FanDuel.
Yeah, he's 5,600 on FanDuel, 5K on DK. No
Yeah,
issue with that price tag at all. And also, there is not going to be a more favorable matchup the Jaguars are going to have this year than playing the Houston Texans, other than when they play the Houston Texans again later in the year. But I like the spot. I think that the Jaguars should be able to get off to a relatively good start, at least, a good start for Lawrence and some of the expectations coming into him. The other player that I really think we need to focus on and talk about here, Marquez Callaway, who just given the situation for the Saints at receiver heading into the year, no Michael Thomas, Jameis Winston's going to be quarterback. And say what you want about Jameis Winston, whether he's a good or a poor real life quarterback, he's gold for fantasy for a lot of purposes.
yeah.
He takes shots downfield. He's going to turn the ball over a bunch. He's going to throw touchdowns. He's going to rack up passing yards. He appeared to have some sort of connection with Marquez Callaway in the preseason. It seems like a guy who's comfortable with that he's going to be locking into. Once again, Marquez Callaway, I do not understand the ownership here on DraftKings. He's only projected for 14% ownership, 3,400. Over on FanDuel, 5,200, a little more expensive, but he's only projected for 6% ownership. I think Marquez Callaway has to be a staple of cash games this week and tournament options. I think that he's as good as the cheap plays come.
Yep. So 100% agree. Or I shouldn't say it. I'm really torn on what I'm going to do with Marquez Callaway. 100% agree that he's a cash game staple. Yeah, so I feel like I've seen tons of people talking about how do we get away from the Callaway chalk. And then I look at the boom bust tool, and he's only projected for 14% ownership, but he has a 19.6% boom probability. So I'm like, he's not really that chalky relative to your expectations for him in the tools. So I'm torn between, is he actually going to stay that low? I also like, it's hard for me to kind of comprehend that boom probability, because I feel like it is a little bit of a tough matchup. It's hard to know if they're going to be able to move the ball, if he's going to be the wide receiver one. According to the boom bust tool, I actually kind of preferred Deontay Harris for 3,200. I think so. I think I'll have a lot of Callaway. I don't think I'm going to full fade him. I'll probably just go right about even with the field, just because there are so many players in that price range that I like who are going to be like 1 or 2% owned. And so Deontay Harris has a 1.4% projected ownership, but a 12.7% boom probability. To me, that's just so high. I'd prefer to go there over Callaway. But Callaway is definitely the safer bet. And like you said, in the preseason, he seemed to be the guy. So chances are he is the number one. But I'm not gonna smash him into my lineups in a GPP, because I expect that he'll be probably moving up in ownership as we get closer to lock.
And by the way, I agree with you on Deontay Harris also. And I don't think there's any reason you can't play Jameis Winston with both of these guys, because Deontay Harris is 3,200, Marquez Callaway 3,400. They're probably going to have to be throwing the ball in this spot against the Green Bay Packers. And the other thing also to consider about this game, even though it's technically listed as a home game for the Saints, this is out of neutral location. So this does tend to lean the game a little bit more towards the Packers. I think New Orleans is going to have to be throwing the ball to keep up. So I think that this is a spot you can roster both of them. And by the way, in the build I have right now, I have Deontay Harris in 12% of my lineups, which is well over the 1.4% the field has. So I have no issue with either of those guys as strong options. But I want to ask you said there's a lot of guys in this price range that you are gravitating towards that's going to somewhat mute your ownership to Callaway. Who are some of the guys you were referring to?
So there are two guys on the Washington football team. I really like Adam Humphries. He's a guy I was taking a lot of in best ball, just based on all of again, maybe I'm buying into the preseason buzz more than I should. But he's a guy that they were talking a lot in the preseason about Humphries' chemistry with Ryan Fitzpatrick, that he was just, Fitzpatrick was targeting him a lot. He's only 3,000, and now there's no Curtis Samuel. So I feel like he's just a guy that I want to have some exposure to. He's projected ownership of 4.1%, but a 12.9% boom probability. That combined with all the buzz, I'm just going to give it a shot, see how it goes. And then there's been a lot more buzz about De'Ami Brown the past few days since Curtis Samuel was ruled out. I think I prefer Humphries to Brown, but I'll probably play some Brown as well. He has 1.7% projected ownership and also just 1.7% boom probability. So I'd prefer Humphries, but I'll probably play some of both. for
Yeah,
the
and
wash.
the YouTube chat is going to be happy to point it out, Danny Brown, because there was a couple of people that already posting like, "Hey, but don't sleep on Brown. Talk about Brown." And
Yeah.
there we go. We got the shout out from Neil, who's going to be on Dynamic Brown. I am going to be as well. Not quite as much. I prefer Harris. I prefer Callaway, but I have Brown in my player pool, so no real significant issue with that either. Although, like you, I do have more exposure to Adam Humphries. The main reason being is we have Adam Humphries projected way higher in the projections we have on the site. And just to give this out for DraftKings purposes, we have Humphries projected for 11.24 fantasy points compared to 7.29 for Brown. That's enough of a gap that it's going to be hard for me to prioritize getting to Brown over Humphries. But yeah, I think both of them, especially with no Samuel there, there's strong reason to consider both of them as good value plays. Now let's talk about some of the high end receivers, because we have Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf now that the Colts secondary is pretty banged up entering the year. In terms of pay up options at wide receiver, who are you going to be prioritizing?
I'll be playing a lot of Stephon Diggs. Only projected for 16.1% ownership at 7,600 salary on DraftKings with a 24% boom probability. And that boom probability at his price tag is especially impressive because, the higher a salary a player has, the harder it is to boom. So that means that if he does boom, he's going to put up a really big score. So a 24% boom probability at 7,600 is kind of impressive. That's the kind of player that I want to have in my lineups. There's a high implied total for the game. So I really like Diggs. He'll probably be my highest owned of the pay up options. Ridley, we talked about a little bit. I feel like I'm going to have a lot of that game. 7,900. He's only projected for 17.8% ownership and a 23.1% boom probability. So I feel like I'll probably have a lot of Ridley. And then Adams, I feel like is just kind of always safe. I mean, he had 149 targets last year. Aaron Rodgers is quarterback. He is the most expensive at 8,300, so that's a little bit prohibitive, but I'll definitely get to some Adams in my lineups.
Yeah, and once again, these guys in terms of ownership, pretty flat. So it's not one guy who's going to stand and be like, oh, this guy's way lower owned. We've got Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, Hopkins, Adams, Diggs, Ridley. These guys are all projected for 11 to 17% ownership. So pretty tight in terms of what the field's doing with these guys. I don't think ownership could really be a tiebreaker there. It's just kind of which of them do you prefer? For me right now in my build, number one, I have Diggs the most exposure to, Ridley 2, Devontae Adams 3. One other player I want to ask you about moving down the price tags here, and then I'll open up to ask you about any other wide receivers you like. Is T. Higgins somebody you're getting to a decent amount in your initial build?
Yep. So I have them grouped in with Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd, just trying to figure out who to play from those three. I was expecting Tyler Boyd to be not owned at all, because I feel like he's kind of the boring one of the three that people don't really talk about that much. But it's not really looking that way in the boom bust tool. So I'm seeing Higgins at 11.6% projected ownership and an 18.7% boom probability. So I really like Higgins. I mean, 4,700 for a guy as talented as T. Higgins, and in that matchup against the Vikings, I'm expecting one of those three to do really well. They do only have an implied total of 22, so probably not going to be playing more than one Bengals receiver in any lineup, but I'm going to sprinkle all three of those guys in. We got Jamar Chase at 4,800, 4.5% ownership, 10.1% boom probability. I really like that. Boyd is actually the worst of the three, I guess, because his price tag is a little bit higher at 5,200. So the 10.4% boom probability is not, too crazy. But yeah, I'm definitely I'm gonna be playing some of all three of them. I referred to them as being chalk earlier, but they're not really that chalky. So yeah, I like the Bengals receivers. I haven't decided yet how I'm going to approach, like who I'm going to have the most of. It'll probably be Higgins, just because he has the highest boom probability and he's only, he's cheaper than both the others. But I'm going to have some of all of them.
Did you read the story about Jamar Chase from yesterday, where he was asked about all his drops in the preseason? He was like, "Hey, the NFL football looks different than college football. I'm having trouble seeing it." Did you read that story?
I didn't read the story, but I saw his tweet I saw it on Twitter, and I saw his tweet in response to it saying, I didn't say that it's harder to see the ball. He said that he was asked specifically about the differences in the ball. So he claims that he did not say that it's harder to catch the NFL ball. I don't know. I'd like to see the actual quote, but it was some fun drama. And he dropped in a huge way in best ball, I think, because of it. And I got a ton of him late in my best ball drafts because people stopped drafting him. Apparently they bought into it.
That's probably one of my favorite overreactions ever. That, and also when you have, and I didn't really have the time to do to do a bunch of best ball drafts this year. I know you and we did a bunch of NBA drafts and we were DMing about it on Twitter at the time, but I wasn't able to dive that hard into football just because I have football content going around, and then obviously all my baseball stuff also. But yeah, there was definitely some stuff I saw where it was like Austin Eckler was sat out one practice, didn't even have a real injury designation, just sat out one practice, and all of a sudden he's like a late third round pick in best ball draft. So it seems like every news item people are way overreacting to as the season gets closer, which I kind of think is interesting. But any other wide receivers here that you want to bring up that are important plays to you before we move over to tight ends?
So Matt Savoca was touting Paris Campbell on the show yesterday, a couple days ago, and kind of sold me on him. So he's Paris Campbell in the boom bust tool, 4.6% ownership, but a 10.8% boom probability. Matt pointed out that in the only game that he played the full game last year, he had 9 targets, and Paris Campbell has big play potential. So I'm going to get to some Paris Campbell and also Michael Pittman. But yeah, I'd say Paris Campbell's the guy that I'm going to be kind of targeting there.
Okay, that's I don't mind that as a low owned shout. And yeah, he was somebody who looked like he was going to potentially break out. And actually, he was somebody who I did do a bunch of best ball drafts last year, and I had a lot of best ball exposure to Paris Campbell. It was one of those things I felt really good about it earlier.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like, oh well, that went poorly very quickly. I had my best ball teams were ravaged by injuries last year for NFL, to the point where I had teams that weren't even fielding a full roster by like week 6 or something like that. And I just had empty spots.
It was rough last year.
Yeah. and the other thing that was funny about last year also is because it was the first year that DK was doing the best ball. I was doing some of the drafts like, these are so tedious. Why do I have to pick so many players? This is a waste of my time. And then a month into the season, I don't have enough players on my roster to fill the full team. So that was ultimately how it went. Now, let's move over to the tight end position. But first, I'm going to point out that we do have a promo going on right now at Awesemo.com. If you want access to our Awesemo Plus NFL Express Weekly Pass, it is only a $1 using the promo code ZAC. That is going to be an offer that's valid until Monday, September 13th. Really good way to just dip your toes in some of the tools we have up on the site. It's only $1. So if you're new to Awesemo, we want to check that out. That is promo code ZAC only for $1. And now if you are already a member or you just want to get to a premium platinum pass, you can use the promo code NFL Strategy Show at checkout. That'll get you 25% off a week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And that'll get you full access to everything we have for all of the sports for a week. So also, I would definitely recommend DAC promo code, only $1. Good way to start off the NFL season. Now, let's talk about these tight ends, a position that I think is pretty clear. I'm going to be rostering a lot of Travis Kelce, a lot of George Kittle, a little bit of Kyle Pitts. Don't really think I'm getting to anybody else at any kind of real meaningful exposure.
Yep. So I'm definitely be playing a lot of those 3. I would add in Mike Gesicki in the boom bust tool. He's only projected for 2.3% ownership, but he has a 6.7% boom probability. That's interesting to me. So I'll probably play some Mike Gesicki. And then the other one that's really interesting to me is the Philadelphia tight ends. So I kind of planted my flag back in July. I tweeted out that I thought we were drafting Zach Ertz 30 spots too low in best ball when he was going around spot 200. Because I feel like people give up on older players too early. Like he was a stud, has one down year, and people are just like, okay, that's his trajectory now. He's just shooting down. He's going to be useless. And there's a lot of unknowns there. And I was thinking, man, I feel like he's talented enough that however this goes, I'm going to want some Zach Ertz, even if he's not on the Eagles. So he's back on the Eagles. This isn't actually what I was expecting. He's back on the Eagles, and rumors are that Jalen Hurts is loving passing to both of the tight ends. So I was really hoping to get Zach Ertz at really extremely low ownership. I think Goddard might be the play that I'm actually swinging to, though. So we've got Ertz at 3,800, 2.3% owned, 2.8% boom is fine. I'll be playing some Zach Ertz, but I feel like people have been scared off by Ertz a little bit. Scared off of Goddard by the presence of Ertz. So now I feel like Goddard has become a little bit more interesting because he's 1,000 more. And I think everybody's saying, well, why am I going to play Zach Ertz, or why am I going to play Goddard when I can get Zach Ertz for 1,000 less? And they're, who knows what's going to happen there. So I'll just take the cheaper guy. And I feel like that often presents an opportunity to get a player at lower ownership than they should be. And so I'm going to be playing a lot of Dallas Goedert at 4,800 as well, I think. The Boom Bust tool has him at 3.1% ownership and 4.3% boom probability, which is nothing special, but I feel like I'm going to try it out, hope that he goes a little bit lower than expected.
By the way, so Neil on Twitter is player QDFS, and his Zach Ertz, while he was talking, I dug it up really quick. I retweeted it. So if you guys want to find Neil's Twitter handle, I'll be right at the top of my feed now as well. But yeah, July 5th, he did tweet about Zach Ertz. It is confirmed. It has been retweeted by me. It was right there. But I just kind of feel like I'm going to be going with a lot of the chalk at tight end this week. I just think the floor and ceiling is so much higher for Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and then Kyle Pitts, maybe not the floor, but the ceiling for sure. To me, they just stand out so far above all the other tight end options. And even though they're more popular, it's not like in a crazy way. Travis Kelce, 16.5% projected ownership, Kittle, 11.5%, Pitts, 11.3%. I think all of these guys probably warrant more ownership than that. And once you get into some of these other cheaper guys, like, Jazicki, I think is sensible as a one-off, but we've got Kelce project for 20 fantasy points, 15 per Kittle. Nobody else is above 11.5. There's definitely tiers to the tight end position, but I don't really see a need to go too crazy dumpster diving with any of these plays unless you see it differently. Where is there anybody who's really cheap that is making it into a portion of your lineups?
No, I mean, I think that you're right. I wouldn't blame anybody if you only play those three tight ends or even just Kittle and Kelce. If you're playing 150 lineups, like you could just play those two. They do project really well. Their boom probabilities are a lot higher than their ownership. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with doing that. And as somebody pointed out on one of the previous shows, to play one of the cheaper guys, you are kind of making a bet that all of those higher priced tight ends fail. So like you're kind of making that bet, and that's a little bit harder when you do have both Kelce and Kittle in really good spots, and Pitts, assuming that he is, who we think he is, he's also in a really good spot. So it is a tough bet to count on all of them to fail. I actually think that one of the Philadelphia tight ends could go off. Like I think that it's not necessarily making a bet on all those other guys failing, because I think that those guys both have the talent and they might have the target share to actually put up big scores where they don't need the other guys to fail. And I'm not opposed. I know a lot of really good players are opposed to playing two tight ends in a lineup. I'm not opposed to putting a tight end in the flex. I feel like we've seen it work often enough. They're often, cheap, and so I'll probably have some two tight end lineups as well.
Yeah, and I mean also Travis Kelce is essentially, he puts up wide receiver stats anyway. So I went through his box scores last year, including the playoffs. After week 7 last year, he had one game where he scored under 22 fantasy points, and he scored 16.2 in that game. So Travis Kelce was absurd from a fantasy perspective last year. And compare that to him at 8,300, we have him projected for over 20 fantasy points. It's not that much different than what we have some of the top wide receivers projected for. We have him project for more fantasy points than Tyreek Hill. We have him project for more fantasy points than DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson. We have him only a fantasy point behind Devontae Adams. So it's not like there's some big gap between him and these guys. So certainly in lineups that have Patrick Mahomes as the quarterback, I don't have any issue going to two tight ends. And him and George Kittle, I expect a big bounce back season from Kittle after he was hurt a lot last year. So yeah. For sure, I'm going to be getting to a lot of Kelce also in the utility spot. Now, really quick, let's go over some of the defenses here, and then we could wrap up. I don't think, Tyler, we don't have a hard out, right? All right, he doesn't now, but whatever. I'm making the executive decision here. We're gonna go a couple minutes long, but also, guys, do us a favor, because Neil and I have been sitting here talking. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots of content on the YouTube channel for football coming up throughout the day. Also, we've got our normal baseball content, and there's going to be a NASCAR strategy show. So like the video, stick on the YouTube channel all day. But let's talk about some of the defenses, which I only include this to pain and torture myself. I hate talking about defenses, but I do this just to make myself uncomfortable. But what are the defenses that you're currently getting the most exposure to in tournaments?
So I'm looking at mostly the Falcons, the Niners, and the Patriots, I think. The Falcons, I kind of expect to be chalk. They're 2,000. It's funny because I've been talking about how much I like the Philadelphia passing game, how much I want to play the Philadelphia offense, but I'm also going to play a lot of the Falcons defense. They're just 2,000. Jalen Hurts can make mistakes. We don't really know what to expect from the Philly offense. According to the Boom Bust tool, they're only going to be 13% owned, which is kind of high, but nothing crazy. And then they have a 15% boom probability. So I'll be playing some Falcons when I need a cheap defense. How about you?
I really do like to save salary at defense where I can, and the Falcons being min price certainly makes a whole lot of sense. Going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, one thing that gives me a little bit of concern, if Jalen Hurts is going to be running the ball a lot, I'm just not sure if that's ultimately going to lead to the best
Yeah.
potential outcome for upside for the Falcons. They are projected to also be the most popular offense on the slate, but they're min price, and I don't really think you could go wrong with a team at a minimum salary. The one that actually stands out to me, and this is like the inverse of what I said, is that I usually like to try to pay down for defenses. The 49ers only project for 1.8% ownership.
Yeah,
And I think they
man.
should win this game pretty comfortably. And assuming they're up by 8 points, or somewhere around 8 points, that's what the spread is for this game. Jared Goff is going to have to throw the ball in the second half against a really good defense with an absolutely miserable offensive line in front of him. Jared Goff struggled at times with great pass catching options and a good offensive line in Los Angeles. I think this could be a disaster for him in Detroit. And if you have the wiggle room to pay up for a defense, I think the 49ers are a sensible way to get contrarian. I would not be surprised if they end up racking up a couple of turnovers, maybe a defensive touchdown. So that's one way I think we get different, especially because there's so much value on the slate.
Yep. So there are actually only two defenses that I wrote down on my sheet, being the Falcons and the Niners, because I love the Niners. I just think like Jared Goff kind of has a reputation for maybe he's just really not a very smart football player, but Sean McVay is constantly in his ear telling him what to do, helping out. So who knows what happens without Sean McVay in his ear? I mean, there's a possibility that he's just going to throw pick after pick and just be terrible, especially against this Niners defense. They're all healthy now. Going to be one of the best defenses in the league. So yeah, I absolutely love the Niners in this spot, particularly because, like you said, they're probably going to be forced to throw. The Lions are going to be forced to throw. So the Niners are just going to have more opportunities to pick the ball off, force fumbles. I'm going to be playing a lot of the Niners, especially at 1.8% ownership. That's insane to me. Like, how are people not just playing a ton of the Niners? I'm guessing that's going to come up. But man, if it stays below even 10%, I'm going to go way over the field on the Niners.
I dig it.
Yeah.
And also something really crazy. It's like $12 on Yahoo. They're one of the cheapest defenses over there, which that really makes no sense. But so now here's how I've decided we're going to close the show out, Neil. You and I are each going to give out our favorite quarterback to pass catching, or it could be a running back, whatever your favorite stack is on the slate. We're going to close it out by giving it out here. I'll start with mine, something I talked about before. Lawrence to Chenault. I think that is a combination with a lot of upside. I like the price point there. So Lawrence to Chenault, that is something I'm going to be prioritizing quite a bit on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Now I'll ask you, what is your favorite stack for week one? And then I'll close this out.
I think I'm going to do Darnold to McCaffrey, just because I don't think many people are going to go with that combo. I think that, some people will play Darnold. Obviously, a lot of people are going to play McCaffrey, but I feel like there's some potential for McCaffrey just scoring multiple receiving touchdowns, and that being a combo that not many people have, but it has a chance to go off.
Yeah, hey, I dig it. And also McCaffrey might as well be a wide receiver. Some of his receiving stats, even last year in the time that he played, which was only 3 games, he crushed in all 3 of those games, and always going to be a great fantasy option. But hey, we made it through week one. Neil, I'm excited that we're going to be doing shows together this year. If you guys haven't done it already, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll be back next week. Good luck, guys.